So good morning, good afternoon, and also good evening. Welcome to this STARS webinar. I'm Toni SCHOENENBERGER. I'm the Executive Chairman of STARS. STARS, as many of you know, is a global platform for dialogue to discuss developments which will impact our society as a whole, but particularly our businesses in the next couple of years. In this context, I'm pleased to inform you that STARS is preparing two symposia in Singapore and in Switzerland in 2026, and also a study tour to China, to Shenzhen and Guangzhou, and a study tour to Romania, Bucharest. Please visit our website for more information. Now, no doubt, geopolitical, geoeconomic, and geotechnological intelligence is a must for any leader in business and in society. So today we are continuing our webinar series. Complexity is destiny, orientation in times of no direction. And today we have the great privilege to talk to Mona SUTPHEN. Welcome, Mona. Great to have you on this webinar.
Great to be back.
Mona SUTPHEN has over 20 years of experience advising multinational companies and investors. She's a partner at the Vistria Group, a private equity firm in New York. From 2009 to 2011, Mona served as a White House Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy for President Obama. And I'm very proud to tell you that Mona is also a member of the STARS International Board. So Mona, we are very much looking forward to your insights. We have now 30 minutes to discuss with Mona SUTPHEN. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature below to type in your questions. And I really encourage all of you to do this as fast as possible because we are running out of time very, very quickly. So let's start. And I have the privilege, obviously, to ask the first couple of questions. The title of our webinar series is Complexity is Destiny. And if you look at the world today, at a crazy world actually, a forward-looking tracking of geopolitical, geoeconomic, and geotechnological dynamics is needed. Now the question to you, Mona, is what worries you most these days?
Yeah, well, great to be with you again. And yeah, that's the hard question, right? What worries me most? Because the list is so long. However, I would say unfortunately, my answer is very philosophical, I think, because my sense is we have a bunch of challenges globally that create all kinds of complexity and risk for all of us in our day-to-day lives and certainly in our business lives. But I see those as symptoms of a deeper problem that we have, which is that our systems of social governance, not governments, although government is a problem in this context, but actually how societies function, has really not kept pace with technological change. And so, we really have the way our societies are formed, the way communities operate, the way our governance structures work, elections, democracies or not. We're in a situation where we really are still dealing with 20th century community structure, when in fact the world technology is kind of blowing up those systems and stressing them in ways that are making people feel very, very anxious about their future. And when people generally feel anxious about their futures, bad things have a tendency to happen, which is, I think, what we're seeing today. So at a high level, I would say that's by far and away for me, and I think it's true regardless where you look. And I would say one of the symptoms, in addition to having all the stresses and strains that you're seeing now as people try to jostle for advantage in this complex world, is you have weak leadership generally. And I know we can talk about President Trump, we can talk about other leaders, but strong leaders who can actually stitch together a consistent governance framework globally, we are severely lacking at this point.
You mentioned technology. If you look into, let's say, 2030, 5 years from now, where will that lead us? What are you expecting, if you look at all the opportunities regarding technology?
Yeah, I
DeepSeek,
mean,
Chat GPT, etc.
yeah, Chat. I mean, and not just that. There's also the blockchain. There's
Yeah.
digital assets. There's the energy transition. There's so much technology advancement across so many different planes at the exact same time. The time in history that's somewhat equivalent, I would say, is in like the 1950s and 60s, where you had, commercial aviation. You had a whole bunch of innovation that really changed kind of the landscape economically, productivity gains pretty significantly. It created lots, though, of social fissures and created winners and losers. So I feel like we're entering a period where, because of things like AI, but again, all those other technologies, you're ending up with there's a little bit of a winner seek all mentality. We can get into why people are investing so heavily in AI, but there is this perception that if you don't run fast, you're going to be left behind. If the US, I think, might be the furthest along in terms of the social and economic disruption from AI in a practical way, um, meaning people not getting jobs, people being laid off, whole categories of industries being wiped out overnight, companies' valuations either going through the roof, a la Nvidia, or literally disappearing overnight. So we're in a very, very volatile situation economically as a result of the technology. And I'd say, again, the social consequences of that, if you think back to the 80s and 90s with trade dislocations globally, right, when we moved trade from the US and Europe into more developing countries, it created a lot of political consequences that we're still really grappling with, like right now, in the United States and elsewhere. That is nothing compared to the hollowing out of a white collar workforce that's what's coming. The degree of it, as you know, there's lots of debate about how much is it going to be, how quickly is it going to be. It's to me, it's happening very fast. I see it kind of across what we're saying where I sit in my day job. I see it both coming in from above, I see it coming in from the side, and I see all the things that my firm and all the other firms I know are doing. So it's real and it's having real world consequences, already changing who we're hiring, why we're hiring, what we're hiring for. And if that's just one little microcosm, that's happening across the economy globally and will happen across the economy globally. So 5 years from now, I would say if we're headed where we are headed now, it's going to be a very uh, unstable world, I would say. Much more
Can you
unstable than it is right now.
would you please deepen that a little bit? Unstable. How pessimistic are you indeed?
So on the one hand, I'm super optimistic because history shows that when you have, I was saying with one of my colleagues that all of the things that we thought when the internet first happened, and at the time, if you remember when you first Google was, you just first had search, you had the internet. Google was like the 20th search engine out there. It wasn't the first, wasn't the most well known. If you look at all the companies that were perceived to be winners back then, very few of them are winners today. And what that tells you is that the pace of change, things like Uber, nobody could even conceive of the idea of an Uber. Like that just wasn't even in the realm of possibility of people's minds to conceive of. So I'm constantly amazed by the human capacity to innovate on top of innovation. And I feel like everything that's going on with AI right now is just utility. It's all going to be commoditized. The real value is going to be when people build things on top of those models, and where that could take the world. And we have a choice about what we want to build and how we want to build it. So could we destroy the planet and destroy humanity? Sure. Could we solve a bunch of problems that have been chronic for the world? Absolutely. So I'm on the one hand, I'm super optimistic just because of that past pattern, and it's been proven out time and again. And it's great that it's not just the US that's doing the innovation either, right? So you have China, that's good. Competition is good. Different innovation models, great. People come up with different solutions, fantastic. So in that sense, I'm super optimistic. Where I'm really pessimistic is where I went at the beginning of my answer, which is already our governance is not set up to deal with what we have today. That's before AI, right? So we're probably fundamentally not governing ourselves collectively in a way that is productive. And what happens when you don't really manage people's fears and anxieties and to show a path toward surviving and thriving in society, you end up with people doing all kinds of things, taking up arms, people, you know, resisting in all sorts of ways, very, very, very volatile politics. So think swinging of elections back and forth, which we're already having, but you magnify that, right? It's a little bit like climate change, right? It just gets more and more intense the swings and the impacts.
What will then be, if you can deepen that a little bit, what will be the impact on geopolitics? What you've just said, are we all speak of a multipolar world, but on the other hand, there is a G0 world without any governance and anything. How do you see geopolitics in 5 years from now?
Yeah, so I would say we're entering what I call the yo-yo phase, which is you're on your own. And you're on your own in a fundamental way. And the governments haven't quite, and societies haven't quite gotten their arms around that. But you see that a little bit in the US-China dynamic today. Everybody wants to chart their own course. Everybody is going to want to do what's in their narrow self-interest for that moment. And that is the instinct. That's what you see people doing, basically. I mean, from Putin to Netanyahu to Trump to Xi, I mean, you name it. You point me a leader, everybody, Germans, everybody's the Brits, everybody's just going on their own, Argentina, but against the backdrop of very volatile domestic politics. So going it on your own means you could have like wild swings, and what does that mean for different governments at different points, right? And so I think that's the world that we're headed into. People who figured that out are starting to move in that direction. But that doesn't mean you can do everything alone, right? Because you still need things to function. So I think you're going to end up with many, many more, I would call tactical alliances. So people talk about a mercantilistic kind of going back to that competitive mercantilistic kind of dynamic that we had pre-World War I. I think that's kind of where we're headed. So you see people use the leverage they have to get what they want at that particular moment, and then they move on to the next thing the next day. And alliances will be formed and dissolved based on those impulses for the fairly short term. And people will be trying to strike friendships that they think are a little bit more durable and having to pay a higher price in order to have that stability of supply chains or anything else, right? So, challenging.
Great. There's now already a question from Jimmy Chong, and I read it. They said AI has made corporate ladder collapse. No more learning rope on job training. That's what left is you either do a job that are paid lower than robot, or you are super scaler, leaving vacuum in middle level. Do you agree?
So yes, but no. I mean, my observation is that is a potential, and in some industries, that's definitely the case. What I've observed so far is that a lot has to do with the industry segment and the structure of that industry. Importantly, is it regulated? Is it not regulated? The more an industry is regulated, the more there automatically has to be more human layers because human beings have to certify that something has happened properly. This is why you don't see that AI is a little bit slower in healthcare. It's coming fast. But part of the reason it's a little bit slower is because, at least in the United States, we have a lot of privacy laws. There are lots of things that people have to authorize. You're signing on the dotted line if you're a corporate director or you're a CEO that your earnings are accurate or that you're delivering your services in the way, shape, and form you say that you are. It's very difficult today with AI where it is today to be able to do that successfully. You have to have a middle layer of people. Now, I do think the corporate ladder, which you are seeing, is kind of a narrowing of that corporate ladder. So instead of a pyramid, it's more of a block. My sense is that you're going to end up with it'd be a lot harder to get an early stage job because we had giant pyramids. If you think McKinsey, banking, whatever, you had lots of junior people that rolled up. So a very wide base pyramid is going to be a much narrower pyramid. But what that means is if you get a job, it probably will pay more. And that career path, because very few people will move up the rung, and you still are going to need people to oversee a bunch of things on the way up. So fewer jobs at the bottom level, actually potentially higher paid jobs all along the food chain. But then the question, what does everybody else do, right? And so what you see already, I can see this. There's a huge trend toward in-person jobs. Teaching, people are applying for teacher positions are going through the roof. Nursing, because well, the last time I checked, like robots are not putting shots in arms yet, right? Areas, at least in the US, where there have been chronic shortages of workers, skilled trades, plumbers, electricians, nurses, doctors, things that have a human interface are becoming very popular. And people instinctively can see that those are somewhat protected and could be really enabled by AI, but will not be washed away entirely by AI.
In this context, the question from Mark Dickley. You mentioned your world, you're on your own. What does that mean going forward for small open economies like Switzerland, like Singapore, who have thrived under a rules-based order?
Yeah. So, well, you could argue that it's actually Switzerland, UAE, Singapore, in a way, are vulnerable because of the comfort with the rules-based order, but also in a little bit of a pole position as well when it comes to things. Because the other thing that the three economies have is a fair amount of independence and have had a fair amount of independence. So, understanding the dynamics of working constantly with strong states and having to navigate as being smaller is actually a skill set that most economies have never figured out. And having wealth and sophistication in a small economy, I actually think could end up being better. I mean, the people who will really be left out, I think, are poorer countries that are super underdeveloped because the ability to keep any kind of pace with what's going on globally is just going to be very, very limited, right? And it's much harder to then get ahead. So it's a mind I think it's a mind shift change, but it does open up the ability, as you see. I mean, you see the UAE, there are lots of Russians in the UAE, there are lots of Chinese in the UAE. Like they figured out, okay, we're going to be Switzerland. We're going to let everybody come live and work in a high performing, safe society, and let people start enterprises and operate global businesses to the extent they exist, and they will continue to exist and be even more so, right? When you don't have trade rules and you don't have a global world order, what that means is tactically, there's also more opportunity, right? More
Mhm.
volatility, but also a lot of opportunity that can pop up here and there if you're nimble and can take advantage of it. So,
I think we have to touch upon a few other topics. President Trump and Xi Jinping met this morning, actually.
yep.
What are your expectations regarding this meeting and the outcome of the meeting?
So it kind of is played out as we were talking earlier about the taco trade. So this is a classic pattern that you see, which is for whatever reason, Trump got very animated about China a couple months ago or a month ago, upped the ante again, saying he was going to put 100% tariffs back on. You saw markets kind of reacted, but not really, because they're kind of used to the same pattern. And then the administration had to figure out how to climb down from that position. So I see a lot of what just happened as fig leaf face saving excuses as to why you're going to back down from the threat that was fairly hollow to begin with. And I say that because the couple of things that they announced, a pause on rare earths, the things related to fentanyl, those are all low hanging fruit items that are not that meaningful. They did not deal with any of the major issues: chips access, rare earths access longer term, nothing in that realm that is relevant. They didn't really touch any of those things, and that tells you, right, that it was just a way station to something else, and they kicked the can further down the road. Nothing on TikTok, for example. So
How do you see then the situation developing, over the next couple of years
I would say
with
more of
China?
this. Yeah, I'd say more of the same. Well, I'd say more of the same until two things happen in the U.S. One is the Supreme Court case around use of tariffs in the first place. Um, and we can talk about that if you'd like, but that case is being heard now. Um, we'll see ultimately where it lands. I'm not as many observers think that the Supreme Court will strike down his use of tariffs. I'm not so sure about that. But even if they do, I do think the administration is planning on pursuing they have other ways to put in tariffs other than the mechanism that they've used. It's slower, less susceptible to whatever Donald Trump wants to say on any given day, but the authority is there. So I suspect that tariffs will still continue to be on the table in a meaningful way, just not with the kind of up and down, I can put any tariff on anyone. That would change fundamentally the landscape vis-a-vis everybody, by the way, not to, but in particular vis-a-vis the Chinese. And I think change a little bit of the contours of the conversation. Same with the political cycle, right? Depending on what happens in the midterms, any Republican that you chat with on the side quietly will tell you that this tariffs thing is a problem, right? The fundamental dynamic in the US-China relationship has stayed constant, which is people. The relationship is a contested one. It's a complicated one. Both parties are inclined to make it more contested, and the Chinese as well. So we've not really reached, I would say, a stable interaction where we can be competitive with China without escalating with China. Right now, we have a tendency toward escalation. And that's true for Trump. It's been true for the past two administrations. And I suspect it's going to continue to be that way for the foreseeable future, because we're not in agreement on some fundamental things. And there are huge stakeholder class in the US that is highly skeptical about China's long-term ambitions and the intersection with US strategic national interests, right? So as long as there's daylight on that, we're going to be in a contested, choppy, somewhat volatile relationship. The contours of that, obviously, it may not be tariffs, it might be something else, but we are moving to more industrial controls, more export controls, more controls on what can go to China, who can do what in China, et cetera, et cetera. So,
Do you know when the decision by the Supreme Court on the tariffs is being expected?
well, they are expediting reviews, so that means that normally the way the Supreme Court, their docket starts in the fall and they release their decisions in the summer, so October to June. And usually the blockbuster cases they wait until June. This is one where they agreed to do an expedited review just because of how impactful it is. So people are assuming it will be by the end of the year, but I haven't seen the docket to see what the latest and greatest is. But amicus briefs are going in. This is part of the reason why he reacted so much to the Canada. If you saw this news just the last couple of days, the ad that the Canadians were running during the World Series, because it's a anti-tariffs ad at a time when the Supreme Court is considering this case. And if you look at the amicus briefs in the case, it's a lot of Republican business owners, industry associations. The plaintiffs are very compelling business owners. There's bipartisan letters in opposition to the tariffs. So it's a very, very strong bipartisan pushback against his use of tariffs in this context, right?
Uh, could you please elaborate a little bit on the midterm election, on your expectations? And there, in this context, actually, there is a question from Pascaline Eichen. There seems to be a leadership void in the Democratic Party. Barack Obama, your former boss, so to say, is now more and more active. Can you elaborate a little bit
Yeah.
on the midterm elections, please?
Sure. Yeah. So I would say here's the thing. Like, yes, the Democratic Party is in a kind of a disarray when it comes to leadership. Often the case when you lose an election as spectacularly as we lost in this last one. Um, and not just, I don't mean the election loss itself, but just how it all went down with Biden and Kamala Harris. And people feel, both donors, voters just feel frustrated with how everything unfolded. So having periods of disarray is very common in both parties.
Mm.
So I'd say yes, absolutely. And it's, I would argue, kind of necessary sometimes, to be honest, to have the system kind of fall apart at the seams and force people to rethink how to restructure things and build it back. So I'm in this is a necessary destruction in order to build back something that is more responsive and more aware of where the electorate is and how dynamic it is for the reasons I articulated earlier. But the reality is midterm elections are really a referendum on the person sitting in the White House. So candidate quality at the level, Senate candidates, House candidates, that is what drives midterm elections. Full stop. And and as a result, it makes it very difficult. We can talk about Mamdani if you want. The Republicans will try to nationalize. If assuming he wins New York City mayor, he will become the equivalent of Nancy Pelosi, who's kind of faded from the scene. But the reality is, most of those elections are fought in very localized areas. It's very hard to nationalize them. And most voters will tell you in exit polling they're voting whether or not they approve of the president or not. That's why most people in Washington, even with all of the pushback and the redistricting efforts and all the rest of it, people are in it's Democrats' house to lose just because of how close the votes are. So that's yeah. So I see it as necessary. I do think the presidential contest is going to start earlier, though. As a result, I'd say this is the first presidential election since 1992 where there wasn't a preferred candidate for president of the Democratic Party. Now, to be clear, Democratic Party, as I keep saying, has a 0% success rate in successfully choosing who they want as the nominee. And I say that because the three people who've been successful Democratic presidents in my lifetime, so Jimmy Carter, Clinton, and Obama, were three candidates that the party wholly opposed at the time when they started running, right?
Mm.
People thought there's no way that Clinton can win. Arkansas. I mean, Hussein Obama. I mean, we know Barack. I mean, that wasn't happening. And Jimmy Carter was a peanut farmer from Georgia. No way any of them could win. The party was totally convinced they were not the right candidates, and they went on to win. So we're now in a situation very similarly where it's anybody's shot. You're going to have a whole new cast of characters running. I think people will get out early and start shaping the field early because of how long it takes to up your name ID and get to the point where you could run successfully for national office in this day and age. So it's going to be an exciting cycle, I think.
In this context, there's a question from Daniel Spring. Is the MAGA takeover of the Republican Party irreversible, or is there a possible future for a conservative Republican Party?
So I would say right now the MAGA quotient has a stranglehold on the party, but it is very difficult to separate Donald Trump's coattails and the depth of the MAGA support in the United States. It's definitely when people say, "Oh, it's all Trump." I never believed it was all Trump. Trump is taking advantage of something that was a dynamic that was already there, and it has definitely grown over time. But you also see some signs of some lack of durability in some respects. You're seeing, it's unease among evangelical Christians. There are components of the MAGA quotient. You see it with the agricultural community that are starting to say, I'm not really sure that I signed up for this, whatever the this is. And so how strong the coalition is, and is there a leader that can keep it together, I think is a big open question to me. So the answer always in politics, whenever you think in American politics, whenever you think, oh, this is a done deal forever, we're all set, it never is, right? It's just way too dynamic of a country for that. And so I'll be curious. I don't see, I mean, a lot of people, and Trump himself will tell you that it should be JD Vance and Marco Rubio who will carry on the mantle of MAGA. I don't think they're as strong as Donald Trump to carry that on. And the one thing about the presidency is there are people who are very ambitious, and that there may be others who want to challenge them for that mantle, and then you just have to see how it plays out. But I definitely think there's room for people like Brian Kemp, who's governor of Georgia, very conservative, very strong state, very important state, who has managed to have the support of the business community, independents, and the MAGA quotient. So there are leaders out there who are very strong, who could run for national office and give people a run for their money. Whether he does it or not, who knows? And there are other people like that. So you can start to see people creating daylight with the MAGA quotient already today. So,
Okay. Right. Now, final question. We are running out of time now already. Final question would be, looking at all these developments and trends we've just talked about, what is your advice to companies and institutions?
So I think I've been saying this as a mantra since we ever started doing this. You have to do scenario planning. You have to look more broadly at your entire ecosystem, not just your customers today, not just who you're selling to, not just your teams today, and prepare yourself and question. Where I'm constantly saying this to people, everything you assume to be true, you have to question whether those assumptions are actually still legitimate. The only one that we know for sure is the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. Other than that, it's up for grabs. And if the companies that will win are the ones that anticipate, create optionality, see risks ahead, and are just, all you have to do, as somebody said the other day, if a bear is chasing you in the woods, you don't have to be the fastest runner. You just have to run faster than the person behind you. So start running.
Okay. Thank you very much. Time is up
Okay.
already,
Okay.
unfortunately. First, I want to thank you, Mona, very much for
it.
your brilliant insights, as expected, obviously. Indeed, as you said, we are facing disruptions all over. And as you also, I believe, just said, the message is quite clear. Expect the unexpected. And so thank you very much again, Mona. It was great to have you. All the best for you. And
Thank you.
we are very much looking forward to having you again at STARS.
I'm looking forward to it. See you soon.
We are continuing this webinar series on the 14th of November. The speaker will be Parag Khanna, a global strategy advisor based in Singapore. Hope to see you then. Goodbye for now. Thank you very much.